Welcome to a first look at the Canon C300 Mark II with Studio B camera rentals. This is technically the successor to the very popular Canon C300, though aside from the similar form factor and name, it's really a vastly different camera. We're talking about 4K internal recording, even options for 4K raw output, about 3 stops more dynamic range, slow motion capabilities, new LUT options, and even some autofocus features. Let's take a look. On the outside, the Mark II looks a lot like the original C300 with a wider, heavier body, but a similar form factor. The top handle features more screw holes for accessories and generally feels a lot more sturdy and secure with a new screw-on helmet on the top of the camera's cold shoe mount. The new body features all the old menu buttons along with several new programmable buttons on the side and front of the camera. With the Mark II, you can now apply a whopping 10 stops of internal ND, achieved by doubling up internal ND filters to cut out more light. Now for some big differences, your old batteries and media cards won't work with the Mark II. This camera uses a brand new 14-volt battery and records to CFast cards rather than CF cards due to the higher bit rates that come along with shooting 4K. At the highest resolution and bit rate, you'll get about 42 minutes on a 128 gigabyte CFast card. Shooting in HD, you'll get a little over 100 minutes on the same card. Also, the external monitor unit looks a lot like the old one, but now comes with a new type of detachable cable to connect to the body. With the exception of some new menu categories for new camera features, the menu layout is similar to the old C300 and should be familiar to those who have shot with one before. The on-screen display is also relatively the same, with a white balance, aperture, ISO, and shutter speed along the bottom, and card and battery life at the top. The most exciting new feature on the Mark II is the internal 4K recording, which is captured at 410 megabits per second in 422 10-bit color. Shooting in the new Canon Log 2 Cinema Gamut purportedly allows for up to 15 stops of dynamic range. We tested this by shooting against a sunset and found that the footage held up pretty well, allowing for a lot of flexibility in post. Of course, if the image is too bright, as you can see in the center of the sun in this shot, individual pixels on the sensor will shut down so as not to get burned out. The C300 Mark II performs pretty well in low light. We tested it in a dark room with only a lighter for illumination, recording the full standard ISO range of 160 to 25,600 ISO. The camera's native ISO is between 400 and 800, and in this test, things started getting grainy around 1250 ISO and became unusable after 6400 ISO. Another overdue feature that the Mark II brings is higher frame rates. You can drop your resolution down to 2K or HD and get up to 120 frames per second. To shoot above 60 frames per second, you'll have to shoot in the slow and fast motion crop mode, which crops the sensor and punches in on the image in order to free up processing power. We found that the crop factor is pretty extreme and the resulting footage does not look as clean and sharp as shooting in 60 frames per second and below. Another option available when shooting in 2K and HD is 444 12-bit color depth. For shoots where 4K is not necessary, this is a great new feature for getting the most out of this camera with richer and more accurate colors. We set up the C300 Mark II next to one of our original C300s to compare overall image quality and the new color profile looks. You can see that the new Canon Log 2 Cinema Gamut is even more flat than the original Canon Log on the C300. This profile is where you can get the advertised 15 stops of dynamic range. The Mark II has several other preset looks for Canon Log 2, including BT709 and BT2020, and plenty of options for customizing your color profiles. Finally, the new focusing features deserve a look. There's the focus guide, which we found to be a very helpful tool when pulling focus manually, watching the guidelines meet when your subject is in critical focus. Then there's the continuous autofocus and face detection, which can follow a subject's face and keep it in focus. We found this feature to be not as helpful, as it would often lose focus on the face and rack to infinity, ruining the shot. We should mention that we were testing on a pre-production model, so perhaps new firmware updates will improve this function. Overall, we came away very impressed and excited about the C300 Mark II. The new features and familiar functionality make this a powerful but easy to use and versatile camera. Most everyone can agree that the main drawback here is the price, which starts at a steep $16,000 for the body alone. But in our minds, that makes this the perfect camera to rent rather than to buy. And that's it for the first look at the Canon C300 Mark II, available now at StudioBCameraRentals.com.